If you as an executive were to make a study of one of your operations and the findings were to show that it was operating at 30% efficiency, well, you'd probably blow your stack, and you'd certainly do something about it. Well, here is such an operation. It's called listening, and extensive studies have shown that people absorb a scant 30% of what they hear. Not true of you? Of course not. As a manager, you probably do at least twice as well as the average, retain somewhere around 60% of what you hear. But what about that missing 40%? What could it mean to your effectiveness, to your advancement? This first segment of the record is designed to improve measurably your listening ability. That's why it comes first, and that's why it's important that you listen as well as you know how to all that follows. First, there is a single key to why people fail to listen so that they grasp all they hear. It is simply this: most Americans speak at the rate of about 125 words per minute, and they think, here's the problem, they think at least 4 times as fast. Result, 1/4 of the listening mind is occupied with what is being said, the other 3/4 is unoccupied, and the devil quickly finds work for an unoccupied mind. If the listener disagrees with what he is hearing, 75% of his mind busies itself drawing up counter-arguments to what the speaker says, and while so doing, misses half of what is said. Of course, if he agrees with what's being said, he wanders ahead, anticipating the speaker and missing any real differences between the speaker's views and his own. Have you been listening to me? If you have, if you've been using the unoccupied 75% of your mind's time properly, you may have already guessed the key to effective listening. Use the excess capacity of your mind to constantly analyze what is being said. Even if the speaker is boring, don't use the excess capacity to plan that weekend fishing trip. He may make one good point, or he may inadvertently reveal an important piece of information. Here in dialogue form are 4 important tasks for the excess capacity of your mind while listening. First, listen to this sales manager discussing territory realignment.
This section of Michigan is too big for one man to cover efficiently. There are too many widespread market centers. Weather's bad 6 months of the year. Fred Worthington, the man in the territory, is over 60 years old, and the volume doesn't justify a well-manned divisional office.
Job number 1 for the excess capacity of your mind: screen out the irrelevant. Constantly analyze what is being said to isolate that which is not relevant to the main burden of the discussion. Did you spot it in what the sales manager said? Of course, the age of the salesman really has nothing to do with the proper size of a territory. A younger man might well cover it all efficiently, but the other 3 points were relevant to the discussion. So use your mind's unoccupied time constantly to analyze what it is hearing. Point number 2, use it to weigh what is being said against what you already know to be facts. Listen to this product manager making a pitch to have his pet product introduced to the New York City market.
We know we're now getting 40% of the available business in southern New England and 38% of the Indiana-Ohio potential. Let's take an average. 39% of the New York market would amount to roughly $700,000 a year. Now, I say the net profit on that is worth going after.
Does everything that product manager said or implied square with what you know? Of course not. He implied that the New York market was comparable to that of southern New England or the Middle West. Every businessman knows this is far from fact, and that the product manager's argument, as he put it, is totally fallacious. Next point. Listen for what the speaker is not saying. Here's a divisional manager of a large company speaking on next year's plans.
It's my prediction that we'll do over $1 million next year with this product. Results on test marketing are now in, and they're completely satisfactory. We can produce the quantities we expect to sell with the new machinery now on order and the new personnel already hired or committed to us. Well, we'll double the sales force by March in order to effectively market the quantities planned for. Advertising has been seen and okayed by all of us, and we'll hit the media next month. Gentlemen, I think you'll agree that we have a winner.
Do you agree? I don't, at least not on the basis of what he said, because that divisional manager did not say one important thing. Did you notice that with each point but one, he carefully explained how or why it would be achieved? The omission, how the sales force would be doubled. Anyone who has ever tried to double a sales force, unless it was 2 men to begin with, knows it is a challenging task, fraught with every kind of pitfall. Finally, make use of your mind's unoccupied time to assess the speaker's own emotional commitments. Here's a production manager.
The new scheduling may seem a little tight at first, but I'm sure you'll all agree that we'll have a much cleaner, more efficient operation. Production service to each of you will remain the same, but these steps, large volume purchasing, better long-range planning, will ultimately benefit the whole company.
Probably every experienced manager gets a nervous feeling at that kind of talk. No doubt the production manager's operation will be much cleaner and more efficient on the operating statement. But will production service to other departments suffer? It's surely something to worry about, because you can clearly spot the production manager's emotional commitment to his department's performance. Dare I point out here that even if your listening skill is double the national average, you have missed 40% of what you have just listened to. Then may I suggest that you listen to this segment of the Execudisc once more before going on to the others. This has been a Nation's Business presentation.
That's not the significant factor. Now, that decision to build a 110 kilovolt line instead of a 230 has cost us tens of thousands of dollars. And we'd have never made the wrong decision if Roy had been able to convince us of what he believed.
That observation by the chairman of a large utility underlines a crucial management problem. The usefulness of a manager to his company, his bosses, can be crippled by an inability to sell his ideas to his superiors. Yet, this ability is not innate. It can be acquired. It can be learned. And a survey of top executives suggests 7 major ingredients to success in selling your ideas to top management. Listen to this sales manager speaking to the president of his company.
At the same volume of sales. Now listen to this, Fred. At today's volume, the use of manufacturers' reps in the Philadelphia area instead of our 3 salesmen would increase the net profitability of that volume by 3%.
Interesting. How do we know we'd get the same volume, though?
There are a lot of other factors involved. Here, I can show you a couple.
Rule number 1. Catch the interest of top management, usually best accomplished by showing a direct effect of your idea on profits, volume, costs, or competitive position. And if you can orient your idea to a specific interest of the superior you're trying to convince, you'll improve your batting average. But even an idea that has inherent interest for top management won't get very far if the timing is wrong. Listen to this production manager try to catch the interest of his boss.
The new presses I saw in St. Louis are demonstrably 20% more efficient than what we're using now, Fred.
Yeah, I guess we ought to keep that in mind for next year.
Next year? Well, I'd like to install one right away and prove it out.
With the union contract coming up for renegotiation next month?
This production manager not only isn't going to get his new press, but he has planted a serious seed of doubt about his managerial ability in his boss's mind. Good timing is demonstrated by the controller who watched slipping cost controls during a period of high sales and profits and developed a well-conceived plan for the moment when the inevitable economic dip forced a hard look at costs. Perhaps even more than poor timing, overweening pride of authorship has prevented many a good idea from gaining acceptance. The right way to conceal a perfectly natural pride of authorship was demonstrated by the head of the inventory department in a metals fabrication firm. Before presenting his plan for cutting the firm's investment in finished goods, he checked it out with the assembly general foreman, the warehouse and shipping superintendents, the customer service manager, and the plant superintendent. In turn, each brought up problems and suggestions. Result, when the idea was finally presented to the manufacturing vice president, it had the active support of every interested party. Now, for a horrible example of how not to put across an idea, listen to this direct mail advertising manager talking to his boss.
If we go offset on a web press and use a 120-pound coated high opaque, they'll double up the run with another job, assuming we can use the same ink, and we should be able to stay within the budget.
It may be a great idea, but unless the advertising manager's boss is a printing expert, he has little basis for making a decision. His most likely reaction is uncertainty. He probably won't want to demonstrate his ignorance, and so will stall the idea. The rule that was broken here? Avoid the jargon of the specialist. Top management assumes the competency of executives in their specialties, but has a right to expect that ideas will be presented to them in their language, that is, in terms of company objectives. And, speaking of company objectives, do you always keep them foremost in your mind while presenting an idea? Listen to this sales manager attempting to persuade his management to accept a windfall defense contract.
It's a $430,000 contract if we can deliver within the required period. At 8% net, that won't hurt this year's operating statement at all.
I think we ought to take it on, Bob.
Where are we going to get the personnel to staff the project?
Borrow temporarily from other divisions.
In my judgment, that would be a serious mistake. Risking our regular business and customer satisfaction for a one-shot deal. No. I think my decision is against it.
Present a balanced proposal is the rule that was violated here. The man who vigorously proposes an idea that's good for his division without regard for its effect on other divisions or departments is not thinking like a top manager. His boss must be concerned with the company overall, and ideas should be presented in that framework. Perhaps the final rule in getting the boss to listen is to know where to compromise. The secret is a simple one. Always differentiate in your own mind between the basic conceptual aspects of your idea and the details of its application or operation. Once you compromise in the concept, you've changed the original intent and character of the idea. A change in detail, however, can be used as a bargaining point to gain acceptance without destroying the original idea. Oh, one last point. Always avoid getting the unfavorable decision. Whenever it becomes clear that a favorable decision will not be forthcoming, strategic retreat or an alternative proposal is in order. This not only guards you from the stigma of having had your idea flatly rejected, but leaves the door open for a return engagement if circumstances should alter. As we suggested earlier, it should be clear now that these rules are not inborn, but are skills that can be learned by the ambitious manager. This has been a Nation's Business presentation.
Come in. Yes, Fred?
About my request for an increase, you were going to let me know.
Oh, yes. Meant to talk to you last week. couldn't get it through, friend. I recommended you, but things are pretty tight. Frankly, I think you rate a raise. I'm sorry, but...
Saying no is one of the most important parts of a manager's job. Not because it gets you any place, but because doing it wrong is dangerous, can weaken morale, and cause ill will. The manager we just heard was certainly saying no raise in the wrong way. But let's take what he said apart and see specifically where he went wrong. There are, in fact, 9 precautions which, if observed, will protect you from demotivating those under you. Listen to the manager once more.
Oh, yes. Meant to talk to you last week.
Give your answer when promised. The manager had indicated he would give Fred his answer the week before. Promising a decision by a specific date convinces an employee that you're taking his request seriously, that it will be given active consideration, and that you respect him too much to keep him on the hook indefinitely. That's one precaution our manager did observe. But then he fell down on the next. Give the answer when promised. Delay after the promised date does nothing but increase tension, with the result that the disappointment of being turned down may be magnified all out of proportion to its significance. So remember those 2 precautions. Promise a decision by a definite date. Give your answer when promised. These precautions apply equally, whether you're saying no to suggestions or requests. The man who makes what he thinks is a creative suggestion has laid his ego on the line, just as much as when he asks for a raise. Now, let's get back to our bumbling manager and listen to his next error.
Couldn't get it through, Fred. I recommended you, but things are pretty tight.
Frankly, this manager sounds like a messenger boy for somebody else. At least, that's how he's bound to sound to Fred. Fred is likely now to think he should have gone over the manager's head in the first place. The rule here is, accept the responsibility. Don't try to blame anyone else. Now, what did our manager say next?
Frankly, I think you rate a raise. I'm sorry, but...
Don't apologize. That's clear precaution number 4. Any attempt to butter up the employee after rejecting his request or suggestion looks like an effort to absolve yourself of what you knew was a bad decision. Now, let's listen to another manager illustrate the devastating results of ignoring one more of our 9 precautions.
Yes, Marcia?
Mr. Wallace, I have a suggestion.
Sure.
You know the file cabinet where we keep salesmen's reports? Well, I thought if we moved it down the hall, down by the door to the other secretarial office.
Wallace? No, I can come over right now. Got to run, Marcia. You can tell me later.
Now, let's come back to Wallace's office 2 days later.
Good morning.
Mr. Wallace,
Good morning, Marcia.
about the file cabinet, Mr. Wallace, before you get too busy.
Oh, yes. Went right out of my mind. Maybe this afternoon. Don't let me forget.
Yes, sir.
And 1 week later.
If only we could move the cabinet with the sales reports, I'd have room for all those...
Marcia, they're all right where they are. Now, will you get your book, please?
And 2 weeks later.
Good morning, Marcia.
Good morning, Mr. Wallace. Mr. Wallace, I have something to tell you. I'm leaving a week from Friday.
What?
I imagine nobody was surprised but Wallace at that resignation. The precaution that Wallace failed to follow was a simple one. Consider all proposals seriously. Not to consider a proposal seriously implies a certain contempt for the intelligence of the person making it. Yet, under pressure of time, worries, or pressing decisions, any of us can be tempted to give a suggestion less consideration than it deserves. There are 3 more precautions to this business of saying no, all having to do with the atmosphere you, as an executive, create in your department or operation. They are: prepare the way, keep hopes reasonable, follow up. You won't get any ideas, suggestions, or requests if your men don't believe you are receptive to ideas. Anything but a definite green light from you is likely to be interpreted as a red light. So periodically make it known that you want ideas. But keep hopes reasonable. That means complete frankness in contacts with those under you. Sometimes executives refrain from crushing an employee's hopes because it seems more humane. Truth is, this is too often a rationalization for fear of being disliked by one's subordinates. Finally, follow up. This is general good practice for all executive actions, but particularly in dealing with the man who has been interested and involved enough to want to make a suggestion to you. To never refer to his idea again would indicate you never took it seriously. So, keep relations with the recently turned down employee as normal as possible. All of these 9 clues to successful no-saying are based on one assumption, that candor and respect between executives and employees is better for morale in the long run. This has been a Nation's Business presentation. In a big city hotel, a group of businessmen were on the last day of a 3-day conference. After lunch, when all were overinformed, overfed, and tired of sitting, a speaker addressed them at length. After 45 minutes, he said,
"Gentlemen, I find I have spoken too long, and yet I've covered only half my speech. Nevertheless, the remaining points that I should like to..."
Yes, brevity is hard to achieve. But there is a secret to it. Preparation. Believe this, though you may find it difficult. It takes much longer to prepare a 5-minute speech than an hour-long oration. And the technique for achieving brevity is tough editing. Just follow these 3 steps the next time you prepare a talk. 1. Write down your ideas as they come to you. Never mind polish, style, and so on. 2. Organize your ideas in a logical order for easy remembering. 3, and this is the key, cut every paragraph, sentence, to the fewest possible words. Now you have a brief talk, but what about delivering it? Most executives will admit to themselves that this is the toughest part. Here are 6 rules, you might call them 6 attitudes of mind, that can immeasurably improve the brief speech. First, you must believe you can express yourself. Many of us have doubts. But as Dale Carnegie once put it,
If you think any man can't express himself, punch him on the nose. You'll find out soon enough that he can.
you know you can communicate ideas man to man, so think of your group as a single man. See your audience as one person. Second rule, determine that you'll take the time necessary to prepare the brief talk. Eddie Arcaro, the famous jockey, once said,
Horses are like people. Most of them will dog it and goof off if you let them get away with it. At least 70% of all racehorses don't want to win.
and at least 70% of all speech makers don't want to take the time to prepare a brief talk. But the emphasis must be on taking the time, not waiting to find it. Third and fourth rules, use fear. Pick a target in the audience. Most of us feel some apprehension about making a talk, but a certain amount of fear can be a good thing, especially if you let it drive you to proper preparation. And pick a target. Too many speakers see their audiences as a sea of faces with whom they establish no rapport. To establish emotional contact with the group, fix one person, imagined or real, in your mind, both in preparing and delivering your talk. You'll be surprised at how it humanizes both you and the audience. Rule 5. Make sure that something you communicate is a part of you. After hearing a sermon on an aircraft carrier, one of the sailors walked up to the chaplain.
That was a great sermon, preacher.
Tell me, son, just why did you think it was a great sermon?
Because it took something from your heart and put it into mine.
You'll achieve sincerity by trying to put something you truly believe into the hearts and minds of your audience. Finally, Rule 6, say what you mean. This is deceptively simple. An executive once handed a letter to a secretary saying,
Circular file for this one, Mary.
and was amazed to find the letter circulating through the department a few days later. Mary had never heard a wastebasket referred to as a circular file. So, make sure what you say is what you mean, in terms familiar to your audience. Richard C. Borden, expert public speaker, analyzes public speeches into 4 segments in this fashion. 1. 2.
Why bring that up?
3.
For instance?
And 4.
So what?
Here are 4 illustrations of the ho-hum, so what approach to public speaking. Applied by you, they can add bite and effectiveness to your talks. Ho-hum suggests that you are facing a bored or inattentive audience, and they usually are before you catch their interest. So, don't open a speech on public safety with,
I want to talk today about reducing the incidence of traffic accidents in Dayton.
Instead, try something like,
450 shining new coffins were delivered to this city last Thursday.
2. Why bring that up? You've got their attention all right, but they must know immediately why you brought the subject up.
I'm sorry to say that those coffins will be used by whom? Perhaps one of the children we saw going to school this morning. Possibly one of us in this room. Yet we can do nothing.
For instance, the illustrations you use are what brings the subject to life for your listeners. So use illustrations familiar to them.
By a strictly logical attack on the causes of accidents, most of us in this room have cut accident rates in our plants to the bone. Why not apply the same rigorous logic to the causes of traffic deaths?
Point 4. So what means that your talk should have a point. The sharper, the better. As a salesman must ask for the order, you must ask clearly for the action you want from your audience.
If you're with me so far, then follow one more step. Let each of us in this room make 4 telephone calls to those influential people who are not able to be here today. The point of the calls? A letter to the city council from each man, backing up our proposal.
Yes, it's all too easy to talk, and all too difficult to be brief, as we know from many bitter experiences. But if you have something to say, and can say it in a few words, your audiences, your associates, and your superiors will all show their gratitude. This has been a Nation's Business presentation. All of us are aware, sometimes painfully, of the communications explosion that is taking place today. One result of it is mountains of paper. Too much is being written now that ought to be communicated in another way, or even not at all. Here's an example. Incidentally, if you have a second hand on your watch, take a look at it now.
Oh, Ruth, would you come in and bring your book, please?
Right away, Mr. Cutler. Do you have a lot?
Just this memo. Now, memo to Jerry Watkins, subject, direct mail. Jerry, I think your idea about at least testing direct mail as an alternative distribution method for the new product is a good one. Go ahead and explore the possibilities and prepare a proposal. Sincerely. That should go out this morning if possible, Ruth.
All right, Mr. Cutler.
Check that second hand again. And now compare it with this.
Jerry, I think direct mail might be a good idea. Why don't you look into it? Good. Give me a proposal in, the next week or so. Right? Thanks.
Another look at the second hand will demonstrate the waste of putting that communication on paper. It's best to put it in writing is only one of 3 old myths about communicating that, under today's conditions, consume a lot of time and money and even reduce communication's effectiveness. The other 2? Nothing beats the personal touch, and anybody can write. Let's take the first. It's best to put it in writing. Of course, there are many occasions when a communication should be in writing. For example, when you want a record, either for your files or someone else's. It's also true that writing stimulates thinking, helps develop ideas. So write all you want, but communicate only the results of sound management and in the best medium, which may not always be on paper. Another example of management waste that is spawned by the "it's better to put it in writing" myth is prolixity. In addition to the "thank you for your thank you letter" and "send a copy to everybody" technique, there's the simple matter of just plain too many words. Here's our friend Cutler again, responding to Jerry Watkins' direct mail proposal.
Take this, Ruth.
Yes, sir.
To Jerry Watkins, subject direct mail proposal. I was very impressed by your proposal, Jerry, and feel you should continue to pursue your present course of action through the preliminary test. Keep me informed, and we'll get together on the results when you have them. Sincerely.
Not a bad memo, but a waste when Cutler could simply have written, "Okay, keep me informed" on Jerry's memo and...
Ruth, this goes back to Jerry Watkins. Duplicate it for our files.
Now, let's take a look at communications myth number 2. Nothing beats the personal touch. This may be true, but the fallacy arises from the use of the personal touch all over the lot, where it often isn't needed. Efficient management must distinguish between 2 kinds of business writing: original creative writing and repetitive material. Original writing requires all the personal attention you can give it. It is time-consuming and unscientific. Every executive must do it at one time or another, and frankly, there are few shortcuts. But repetitive writing characterizes the lion's share of every company's correspondence, memos, and reports. And the error is that here the writer gives his personal attention where it is not required. Both the faults and remedies fall under 2 headings: the method and the medium. The method of handling customer correspondence, for example, calls for the individual touch. Yet having to dictate the same kind of letter over and over forces the writer to freeze content and language. Result: hackneyed, unimaginative results. The remedy? Systematize routine correspondence by developing prefabricated letters, paragraphs, and phrases. Well prepared, these will sound more natural and be more concise. And what about the medium? Perhaps the personal letter is not always necessary. After all, custom writing is becoming an anachronism in an automated world. So, restudy the carrier for every type of written message in your operation. Design letters, memos, and report forms which require a minimum of writing. Then, achieve personalization through attaching a calling card or brief note of transmittal. Finally, let's take a look at the "anybody can write" myth. Adele Rogers St. John tells this story about herself and an engineer who built bridges. They were chatting at a party one evening when he made the, to her, astounding statement.
You know, Miss St. John, someday I've got to take 3 months off and write a book.
As a professional writer, and knowing the agony, sweat, and dedication that it takes to write a book, Miss St. John replied,
That's a fascinating idea. I think I'll take 3 months off, too, and build a bridge.
True, anybody can write, if by write you mean put words down on paper. But effective writing is a skill that must be acquired someplace, sometime, just as building bridges is. If you need a professional writer in your department or operation, hire one, either temporarily or permanently according to your needs. If your need is a little further down the professional scale, for example, you need a man to travel and send back written reports, at least make sure his writing ability is tested along with his knowledge of subject matter before you hire. An autobiography written in an hour under office conditions is as good a test as any. Finally, training in writing can be included as part of overall company training for those who need it. Lacking this, you will have to investigate outside writing courses. So if you want to cut management waste through improved writing skills, question once more these 3 communications myths. It's best to put it in writing. Nothing beats the personal touch. And anybody can write. This has been a Nation's Business presentation. If you dictate only 5 average-length letters a day, your annual output of written words approaches 300,000. Compare this with the professional writer who is likely to write only about 150,000 words a year, and you will quickly see the value of doing anything you can to speed your thoughts into words. Unfortunately, too many businessmen think of writing as similar to English composition, something they never liked and weren't very good at anyway. On the contrary, a more sensible view is that writing is thinking on paper, something most businessmen are very good at when they apply to it the same cool judgment they apply to other business activities. Here are 6 simple steps that will help you achieve just that goal. You'll spend less time writing and have more confidence and better results. First, be ready to write. You can never put on paper what does not exist clearly in your mind. So define your aim. Is it to get a decision, to give information, or build goodwill? Then collect the data. Are there letters, reports, printed company literature that would help? Should you make a phone call? Consult a qualified person. Now organize the material. A few notes jotted down will free your mind for dictation. Compare the notes with your aim or objective. Discard the irrelevant. And you're ready for step 2. Dive right in. How do I dive right in, you might ask? Well, announce your purpose or state your conclusion. Ask for what you want, perhaps. Tell what you're doing. I've dictated a few of these kinds of opening sentences to my secretary. Listen and see how they get you right into the memo or letter. Let's try announce your purpose. Mary, read back that first one.
Yes, sir. This memorandum outlines the procedure to be followed in establishing vacation schedules in your department.
Now you get right to the procedures. Mary, read back the one under state your conclusion. Note that supporting facts can follow.
The temporary stoppage of production of the S4 tuner last week was caused by the failure of the new automatic assembly. These are the facts.
Ask for what you want.
Will you please search your files for a copy of the Ajax agreement and send us a photostat when you find it?
Tell what you are doing. Note here that the acknowledgement of the request is present, but subordinated.
We are sending you in a single package today the half-dozen sample rolls of the Ace Translux papers you requested October 18th.
You've dived right into the communication. The next step is to keep ideas moving. Your chief problem is to maintain a logical and connected progression. One method is connective sentences. Mary, read those topic sentences I gave you.
Your letter gives us a welcome opportunity to acquaint you with the facts about the Simpson deal.
Of course, the facts follow.
I can think of 3 good reasons why the offer should be accepted.
Here, the reasons follow.
Claremont Industrial Park provides an excellent example of this new concept.
And your description follows. Another connective technique that will keep ideas moving is the repetition of important words. Listen.
Perhaps you have not seen the report on the new copier. The report states that.
And you're right into the body of what you want to say. Another technique is that of placing related ideas in series. For example,
Telephone people sell service in many ways. They sell it with advertising. They sell it when customers visit the offices. They sell it over the telephone. And they sell it when they visit homes on installation calls.
note how the they takes the place of enumerating points. First, second, third. Next step, and a very important one, show your better side. Simply force yourself to say the courteous and tactful thing no matter how you feel. Remember, when it's on paper, it's forever. Try following these suggestions. Look for a scolding tone in the terms you use. For example,
It is absolutely impossible.
can be toned down to
We cannot. You must realize.
simply becomes
We are sure you can understand.
a suspicious phrase like
You claim.
becomes.
You state.
Instead of
The alleged loss.
try,
The reported loss.
obviously,
We have not received.
is far more tactful than.
You failed to send.
The rule is this: it is generally safer to express facts than judgments. And if you simply can't control negative feelings, hold the communication at least 24 hours. The fifth step: write for sense, or perhaps check what you have written for sense. With key words, see that you have chosen the one best word. Are the words in their logical order? We supply standard forms to all our customers, specimens of which are enclosed. We'll probably get a good laugh. But we supply all our customers with standard forms, specimens of which are enclosed. Gets the meaning across better. And don't get lost among the pronouns. Check to make sure your he's, its, she's, and whiches all refer to what you intended them to. Finally, step 6, and perhaps the most important one, capitalize on your natural skills of expression. Be yourself. Don't worry about vocabulary. Don't be sensitive about grammar. Don't worry about sentence and paragraph length, and don't worry about wordiness. It is far better to write the way you talk than to turn into a complete stranger on paper. Tim Sullivan, a member of Congress from the Lower East Side of New York, made the point beautifully once after he had been castigated by a fellow congressman who compared him sarcastically with Daniel Webster. After the tirade, Mr. Sullivan rose with dignity and said,
I may not be Daniel Webster. I don't pretend to be. But I can represent my own district better than Daniel Webster could.
"You may not be Daniel Webster either, but the chances are that nobody can represent better than you what you want to say." This has been a Nation's Business presentation. Private speaking, yes, private speaking can be as important to an executive's progress as public speaking. Probably 90% of your ideas are accepted or rejected on the basis of private conversations with your superiors, subordinates, associates, and others. Yet little attention is paid to the technique and skills that result in effective private speaking. Here are some important tips that can increase your skill. Don't try to impress your listener. You sound sincere when you say things you really believe, in your own way.
According to the organization chart, a department of this size should have 2 more secretaries. It's incumbent upon me to provide full staff.
Not very convincing, was he? Now, listen to this department head.
John, when I see the amount of overtime we're paying on top of office temporaries, I've got to recommend hiring 2 more secretaries.
Points 2 and 3. Be prepared, be brief. The one follows from the other, because the secret to brevity is preparation. Never, if you can possibly avoid it, speak on a truly impromptu basis. Rehearse every telephone call, if only for 10 or 15 seconds before dialing. And if you're called around to the boss's office, use the 2 or 3 minutes it takes to get there to prepare your thoughts. If you don't know what he wants you for, run through the possibilities. What might have come up? What could it mean to you? You won't be right every time, but your batting average will be significantly better. Now, listen to this young man.
If we don't go to 3 shifts before the end of the month, we'll never fulfill our contractual commitments.
What'd he say? Trouble is that people get tired of asking the mumbler to repeat himself, decide it isn't worth the trouble, and thus his ideas never get across. If you think you have such a problem, a simple practice exercise will cure it. Hold a pipe stem or pencil in the side of your mouth and read aloud for 15 minutes every night, trying to pronounce each word as clearly as the impediment permits. Within a month, your diction will be significantly improved. Here is another important tool in private speaking. You have just heard 8 seconds of silence. And silence is one of the most powerful tools at your command. Here's how it can punctuate the answers to a question.
So what would be your recommendation, Tom?
That we put Plan B into effect before the end of the month.
Contrast that with the judicious use of a little silence.
So what would be your recommendation, Frank?
That we put Plan B into effect before the end of the month.
Same words, but what a vast difference in the weight of the recommendation. You might call it poise by pause, because the man who takes his time radiates poise. It can be equally effective to lower your voice when you come to an important point. Never try to outshout someone who's trying to interrupt you. The lowered voice usually gets the attention. Ever suffer from stage fright? Nearly everyone has at one time or another, even in the presence of a single awesome individual. So here are 3 tips for at least controlling it. First, concentrate on what you're going to say rather than how you'll say it. Knowing the subject inside out creates confidence and calm. Fretting about your delivery builds tension. Second point, shortness of breath. There's an effective way of minimizing it. Simply make sure you stand or sit in an erect position. Slouching cuts the wind. And third, when you are frankly terrified of an individual, whether alone or in a group, try this simple brainwashing experiment. Just before you speak, look right at him and picture him at the wash basin brushing his teeth this morning. No fooling. This mental image of him may be just what you need to address him as a person, which is the secret of all effective communication. Now, listen to this executive beginning a presentation to 3 of his superiors.
Before making any recommendations, gentlemen, let me summarize quickly the major benefits of the alternative products we're considering. First, the Massey Harris proposal. The expected sales volume for New England is estimated at, well, I don't seem to have the figure. In any case, it's less, I know that, I'm sure of that, than what we had.
It seems that at least one piece of paper is back in his office, if not at home. The rule he broke? rehearse. Always rehearse any presentation. This is absolutely essential. And rehearse out loud with the actual papers or props you'll be using. You can't know how each part of a presentation will go until you've actually done it. Finally, the semi-formal talk, which falls somewhere between private speaking and public speaking, but can be vital to your advancement. First, always check your appearance. A wisp of hair standing straight up or a wing of your collar sticking out can attract more attention than what you're saying. Don't demand attention when you start. Simply stand up and wait. It's better that someone else do the shushing for you, and they will. Third, your hands. Europeans use them naturally while speaking. Most Americans don't. So fold your arms or place the hands firmly on the table, even in your pockets if standing. This way, if they shake, it won't be seen, and you'll avoid such gestures of insecurity as straightening your tie or patting hair in place. Remember, private speaking is an essential tool of modern management. It is also essential to your personal advancement. Listen to these examples and tips until they become second nature to you. You will become a more effective manager. This has been a Nation's Business presentation. Peter F. Drucker, a leading authority on management in American industry, states that boss-subordinate understanding is a central key to the effectiveness of the management team. Unfortunately, all too many executives think they have this understanding, when in fact they don't. One president of a small electronics firm said,
Jim and I eat lunch together every day. We talk over everything and understand each other perfectly.
Following a communications test given them by a management consultant, it turned out that the president's #1 project rated only 4th on Jim's list. The same kind of divergence may exist in your understandings both up the line and down. To help you improve your understandings in both directions, here is a simple 4-step plan. Obviously, the first step must be to ensure that you have a clear understanding of the responsibilities and objectives assigned to you and your department or division. In order to catch the one possible misunderstanding or wrong priority given to a part of the job, start by listing all the objectives you are charged with achieving and all the responsibilities delegated to you. Then, review these with your superior to ensure agreement. This is vital because, after all, these are the criteria by which you are judged. One department head had this conversation with the general manager after preparing his list.
Well, of course, George. Government contracts are in Fred Carson's bailiwick. I always rely on his judgment there.
Not on your life. The legal aspects are Fred's responsibility, yes. But you and you alone are responsible for passing on the terms of a contract. That is what can make it profitable to us or not.
Lord, I never understood it that way.
Then it's a good thing we had this talk. I couldn't be more pleased you brought it up.
And you too may find some interesting disparities when you bring up the details of your responsibilities with your superior. Now let's take step 2. Here you must review each segment of your job and separate out those things you yourself must do personally. Everything else should be delegated to your assistants or staff. The manager's job is to manage, and when he finds himself doing instead of managing, he's making a mistake, if a perfectly natural one. Listen to this misguided department head and one of his subordinates.
Now, Fred, I want you to supervise closely the installation of each of the new machines. I'll take on the job of training the new operators so you're not overloaded.
I can handle their training all right. There won't be any conflict.
I'd rather you put full time into seeing that this equipment is installed right.
It won't take my full time, and I've trained the men we've got now.
Well, nevertheless, I feel my plan would be better.
If you're a manager, manage. This department head will soon find himself bogged down in the details of training new men, personality problems, and all the rest of it. And the planning, controls, and his managing function as a whole is bound to suffer. Step 3 in ensuring clear boss-subordinate understanding has to do with those men or women who report to you. As you have analyzed and listed your responsibilities and objectives and checked them out with your superior, so have subordinates list in order the 7 most important things they think you want them to be doing. Do the same thing yourself with regard to each individual, so that you can check your list against his in order to uncover areas of disagreement. When these lists are prepared, you are now ready for step 4, a conference with each subordinate, at which you can examine the items and the priorities you both have given them. Listen to this sales manager discussing such a list with one of his regional managers.
I must admit that I was surprised to find hiring number 2 on your list, Jack.
Oh, I understand it's very important, Vince. But I've always figured that keeping current sales up was my number 1 responsibility. The organization manual is pretty clear on that.
Well, there's a perfect example of why I asked you to prepare this list. Yes, the manual does give the impression that current sales is the first preoccupation of a regional manager, but I thought I had underlined pretty hard that expanding the sales force was to get top priority, at least for the rest of this year. Well then, as you see, I've listed training the new men as number 2. Now, Jack, let's have one thing clear. I see this lack of agreement between our lists as a communications failure on my part. I hope the time we're spending this way will correct that failure.
And so our sales manager continues with each of his regional managers and other subordinates to sharpen the two-way understanding that must exist between manager and subordinate for an effective management team. Try this 4-step approach, perhaps at first with one of your subordinates before you expand it to include your boss and all the others you supervise. You'll find it improves all your working relationships and results in a more effective contribution of your department or division toward company goals. This has been a Nation's Business presentation.